Talking with High Point coach Jon Torpey. And John, I got a kind of an interesting question to start with. You were I believe, one of the younger coaches ever to be named to a Division I program where you've been now 10 years at High Point. You were a captain as a sophomore under Joe Bresci at Ohio State. Was there something in the water that sort of you knew what was going on? Because athletes don't, generally speaking, become captains in their sophomore year. So this has been a pretty fast train for you. Is that a fair guess?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Greg. It's something I know I've wanted to do for a long time, and it goes back to really kind of the sophomore summer into my junior year at Calvert Hall. Had two great coaches, and both of them really instilled in me a lot of qualities that I wanted to pass on to that next generation. So, I think when you want to do something, you really attack it with full gusto. And it started as a player. And when I had the opportunity to get into coaching, it was a passion. It was a love. And, when I had an opportunity to, be around great people and coach with great people and, play with great people, I tried to take everything I could from those guys and carry that on with my career. So, yeah, it's been a fun journey, but it's been a journey that I knew I wanted to be on since a pretty early age.
But starting as a captain as a sophomore, that is unusual. You have to admit that.
Yeah, it was not something I think I was ready for, honestly. I thought that all I needed to do was have my actions speak, and I wasn't quite prepared to lead guys ahead of me that were juniors and seniors and even guys within my own class. And it was a great lesson that I had a long way to go if I wanted to get to where I wanted to get to. And I started to be able to have conversations with guys in my own class, started to be able to have conversations with guys in the two classes ahead of me, and realized that I had a lot of learning to do. But I think the main reason why, I was lucky enough to be elected as a captain my sophomore year at Ohio State was purely based on, my work ethic and the fact that I wasn't going to be outworked, and I was going to win every sprint, every long distance run. And I was going to be the guy that, turned on and shut off the lights in the weight room. And, at any free chance I had, I was going to be doing stuff that was, related to the sport of lacrosse. So the actions got me in there. And then as time progressed, I was able to, figure out really how to lead, which was, a lot of trial by fire.
Were you appointed by, or is it a captain thing, appointed by team or appointed by coaches?
Yeah, it was player elected. So Coach Bresci always did a great job of giving us a lot of opportunity to lead. And that's something that I've taken over to our program here and pretty much everywhere I've been. But it was us basically being elected by our peers.
You've been quoted as saying that you've kind of done it at High Point. It kind of goes back into the captainship. You kind of talked publicly about sort of doing it your way at High Point. You've obviously had wins over Duke. You've had wins over North Carolina. Talk a little bit about what your way is, your culture, which is a little bit maybe different than it is other folks.
We haven't quite beaten North Carolina yet, but I appreciate you looking into the future. That's good stuff. Our way. What's that?
You have beaten Duke.
Yeah, we beat UVA twice.
UVA, that's right. My mistake.
Two kind of signature wins, yeah, for sure. But our way, I mean, honestly, we get this question a lot. It's just bringing in the best parents, the best players, holding them to an incredibly high standard, and really, trying to win with more our culture and our system of development, both on and off the field, than bringing in just incredible recruits and just throwing them into a situation where they just play. So, I remember having a conversation with John Danowski when I first took over the program, and I just said, how long did it take for you to kind of instill your culture? Because he came into a culture at Duke with Mike Pressler that was strong, that had some really good players, but he obviously had some different ways that he wanted to do things. And I remember him saying like 6 years was going to take to get them to kind of where they wanted them to be with their learning of fundamentals and just the way they wanted to play and their systems on and off the field. And it's been 10 years here, and I feel like we've just gotten to the point where, we are completely a player-driven team. We've brought in just amazing parents. We brought in phenomenal young men, and they've all kind of gelled together. We've got a staff on board that's just, completely dialed in and locked into, what the ideals are of our program. And we don't try to overcomplicate it. It's just trying to be as authentic as we can be, holding the guys to high standards and doing it with just tremendous people.
Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We're lucky enough to have a conversation this morning with head coach from High Point, Jon Torpey, who is one of the better defensemen that's ever picked up a long pole. Typically, we start these conversations, and I think the easiest part is maybe start in Buffalo to Baltimore. To talk a little bit about what age did you born in Western New York to get back to Baltimore?
We got out of Western New York pretty quick. I still have family up there, though. I was born in Buffalo, and I think it was during the blizzard of '78. And so my parents were just like, let's get out of here. Let's look for a new place to live. And so, they literally just said they put their finger on a map. It landed in Baltimore. They got in their car with my brother and I. And I think at about 7 months old, we were headed down to Baltimore. So have, very strong roots with family in New York City, had strong roots with Jersey City, where my father was from. My mom's from Manhattan in New York City. And, my grandparents are from New York City and the Philadelphia area and Jersey City. So it seemed like a natural fit to go south, but still be close enough where we could get to see them. And the funny thing about my family is not one person outside of my Uncle Billy, who played at Holy Cross, was a lacrosse person. So we ventured into this new area that was the lacrosse hotbed. And it was just, I guess, naturally the transition was going to be for me to play.
When did you pick up a stick for the first time?
I think I was probably maybe 4, 5, 6 years old. And the story behind that is my father worked at a mental institution. And I think one of the patients was beating someone with the stick. And so he took the stick away from them and said, we don't need this thing in at the hospital. So he brought it home for me, and that became my first ever lacrosse stick.
But you beat on your brother instead of the patient at the hospital.
Yeah, when I had chances. But unfortunately, my brother was like 6'5" when he was in like the 7th grade. So the beatings definitely were one-handed, not in my favor.
I think I've heard just about every origin story that I thought I knew. I have never heard that one. So that just went to the top of the list as the best first attempt I think I've ever heard, Jon. That's a fabulous story.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get that one very often.
No, not even anything close to that. I mean, it's something, I make a joke, but one of the things I tell the parents when they come to our programs for the first time is to never buy a really expensive stick, because we know from USL that if you take a one-day lacrosse sort of like a beginning class or just come out for a clinic, 85% chances they're not going to stay. But if you keep them for 3 days, you have a 75% chance of keeping them. So don't buy the expensive stick. Well, I had a garden one day and I took the stick and I turned it over to the bottom, and I couldn't get by the weeds, and I started to use the bottom of the stick to basically as a weeder, right? To just kind of get rid of the weeds. And it turns out with the mesh, it's probably one of the best tools you'll ever use in a garden. So I explained to the parents, for $40, the worst that happens is you can use it around the house. So
listen, you just gave me a great idea for when my kids misbehave. So that's great news.
Yeah, give that a try. So you pick it up at an early age, and you played for an unbelievable high school program, and I think that's got to be a sort of the start to the road for you. I would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was. I mean, again, everything was kind of happenstance. My parents were both schooled in Jesuit schools. My dad went to St. Peter's Prep and then went to John Carroll, and my mom ended up getting her master's degree at Canisius College. So the natural trend for my brother and I living in Baltimore was to go to Loyola. But my brother ended up doing an open house visit at Calvert Hall when he was in 8th grade and just fell in love with the place. And I think my parents didn't want to drive us to 2 different schools, so I just happened to go to Calvert Hall as well. And, looking back on it, it was probably one of the best decisions that my brother, my family, and I ever made. And you talk about a unique place, a private school, Catholic school, kind of on the edge of the city, a place that, attracted and still does, all kinds of different walks of life, all different ethnicities. You got rich kids, you got poor kids, you got kids from the city, you got kids from the suburbs. And it was just a great melting pot, and it was incredibly competitive. And, I didn't know if I was going to get an opportunity to play lacrosse and football at Calvert Hall. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And it really, like I said before, it wasn't until my junior year in high school where I really fell in love with the sport, solely based on the fact that I had, two of the best mentors a young kid could have ever had. And Brian Kelly, who is still to this day one of my great friends and still the coach at Calvert Hall. I was fortunate to be on his first varsity team. And Mike Thomas, who is a local legend in Baltimore, has family roots that go very deep. His father was a Hall of Fame coach. His brother was a Hall of Fame player. He was a Hall of Fame player and coach. And just happened to be in front of the right people at the right time. And the rest is history.
Is there something that those kinds of schools, your Calvert and Boys Latin and some of the schools on the East, Brother Rice here in Detroit has been very successful, and they sort of win everything. And I get the secret sauce. I've coached against them, and those, is there something special about Baltimore and Long Island? What is it they do different in lacrosse that maybe we could learn from out here, even out west?
Yeah, I used to say it was, getting started at an early age. I think that's a big thing, but it's just the people that are around. The abundance of great coaches that, were born in Long Island and Philly and Baltimore and DC that go back to those areas to live and to work and to raise their families. I remember being on I was never fortunate enough to play on like the best youth teams, but our in-home, in-house league, our rec league, I was coached by Jeff Jackson, who was a world teamer, and I was coached by another fella who was a Hopkins player, so it was just like to have those guys in front of you at an early age that were taking the things that they had learned and giving you those values of, what it's like to be a great player, but what it's like to be a great person and, be gracious for these opportunities and hand them off to somebody else. That's what makes those places so special, is just the abundance of great coaches. And again, myself, all those kids from those areas are so fortunate. And I think sometimes, you take those things for granted.
I think the coaching that you get out there is different. And we had talked to Central New York. A lot of guys would come back for their communities and, go away to college, and they'd get coached by the Division I guys, and they would just matriculate back to the, to the summertime, and they work with the youth programs. And I think that has a lot to do with it. We started to coach our middle school programs here with our high school kids because dads didn't understand lacrosse.
Yeah. And
we just made sure there was a parent liaison to make sure there wasn't any, these kids could learn to coach. And the coolest part was the kids would come back and they would just be so frustrated with their team and their players because they coach, nobody listens to me.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, join the club, welcome to coaching.
Yeah. Just the ability for those guys to make the game so simple. And you can understand it and play it at a fairly high speed. That's a big thing, and I remember being out in Colorado, and I went to do a kind of a youth clinic, and there were a bunch of parents there, and the parents essentially were coaching the kids, just like you had said. And I said to him, listen, like if you're going to be good at this and you're going to be able to learn this and be able to convey this information to these young kids, I think it's important that you guys actually come back next week in full gear, and we're going to run you through a practice. And it was one of the funniest things I think I've ever done, but I think it was incredibly telling. And you had the dad who was yelling, instructions that really nobody could understand.
Right.
Now all of a sudden in his work boots, he came from work, he's got jeans on, he's got a Carhartt jacket with equipment on, and he's essentially going through skills that I'm trying to teach him, and he can't do them, So if you want to be able to teach the game to these kids, you have to first and foremost understand how it's played, understand the nuances of it. And when you do that, it just seems to be a good natural fit. Now, there are parents that, have played a high level of hockey or basketball that can understand a lot of the similarities and be able to use the motions and the movements and some of the skill sets. But lacrosse is just one of those games. There are so many moving parts that if you didn't play and you can't understand them, you better be ready to dig in and do some work to be able to not only learn them, but be able to teach them.
I think there's a translation because most fathers probably had played basketball, played baseball, played football, but there's nothing that really translates with this sport.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
It's the nature. We've had a number of conversations. I grew up as a box kid. I'm a Canada guy. Things you grew up with the small game inside. And one of the questions we've been talking about, even back with Matt Brown, one of your old cohorts, is that we see a lot of guys in the Midwest teaching box lacrosse, but really what they're teaching is field lacrosse inside a small space. They're not teaching box lacrosse.
100%.
And if you're going to learn the game of box lacrosse and take the value from that, then maybe take 5 seconds out to learn the process of how the game is played, because it really is a different game. And and you say that to them and they go, oh, no, I coached women's lacrosse for a number of years at Michigan State, and women's lacrosse and men's lacrosse, there are some similarities, but it's like Ferraris and watermelons. There's some crossover, but it doesn't necessarily, doesn't blend to make something sense. So I think you have to get that landing strip correct before you can really move forward.
I could not agree with you more. Lacrosse indoors is not box lacrosse. And the nuances that come with box lacrosse, we all know what they are. The two-man games, the sticks to the inside, the physicality. But the thing that always blew me away with box lacrosse players is how small of a window they need to be able to get success. I mean, it's incredible, and you're talking about a kid who, probably plays some level of competitive ice hockey up in Canada. You're talking about a kid who's coached the same way, in box with a lot of fervor, with a lot of, aggression. And we get those guys down here and people say, what's the thing that, you like the most about them? And it's just, they have ice in their veins. I mean, it could be the deepest, darkest part of the game. And they're, right there with their eyes wide open, ready to go. And, you can never have enough guys like that on your team.
Well, Scott Marr talked about coaching the Thompson brothers, and one of the things he mentioned was it wasn't so difficult coaching their skill, but it was about making sure the other guys on the field, one ball, 6 guys on the offensive end. He said they'd make passes that, especially in the beginning, they'd make passes that you'd go, oh, okay, but guys weren't ready to. So there was an adjustment, and that where did they come from? Well, they came out of that inside game, and guys that had played field were used to a much more open kind of process, and certainly weren't used to seeing passes that they'd never seen before. Obviously that, but
100%.
It was coaching the rest of the team to catch up to what was being. Remember the old 4-second drill? You blow the whistle. Yeah. Well, that's a hot potato drill. It doesn't ever really get you to go to the net.
Yeah,
you kind of move forward.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I'm curious. When Dad brought the stick home from work, was it a defensive stick or a short stick?
It was an orange Sam. It was just a short stick, so the pocket looked like it was used to throw balls to a golden retriever in the park. And I mean, I didn't know any better. The ball was, it looked like a piece of glass. You could see a reflection in it. So, I would stand outside and just play wall ball all day long with that thing.
So when was the first time you picked up the long pole?
It was, I think, 7th grade, or actually it might have been 8th grade. I played midfield and goalie. My first year playing was in 7th grade, and 8th grade, one of my coaches, the guy who played at Hopkins, was like, hey, listen, why don't you play defense? You're big. So I said, all right, sounds good. So I picked up the long pole, and the rest was history.
You played defense because you were big. That was
see, the good old days.
It's interesting. California, they make the biggest kid in middle school the quarterback, which is why they've always produced 6'5" quarterbacks. Goalies are always usually the short, fat kids when they're 7, and by the time they're 14, they're the best athlete on that team because they spent more time skating. It's a parallel. Was there ever any thought when you finally got to playing at a higher level in high school to play short stick, or you've always been happy being a defenseman?
I was always happy being a defenseman. Obviously, as the years went on and I got a chance to play a little bit after college, picking up a short stick was natural because I'd always mess around with one. And I always felt comfortable, playing with a short stick because that's how I started playing the game. But I love defense. I loved, being associated with 7 guys, including the goalie on that end of the field, and being the kind of the chip on your shoulder, not get enough credit type of guy. And it's kind of, helped me kind of get to where I am in life.
So from high school to becoming a Buckeye, how did that transition?
Yeah. So I had a couple opportunities my senior year to go to some different places. It was a little bit later how the recruiting process worked at that point. And my brother had gone to Penn State. He didn't play lacrosse. He's the brilliant one in the family. He's a meteorologist. And so I decided to play lacrosse and, had some opportunity. My junior year, my coach said, if you can get your grades where they need to be, you'll have some opportunity to go some places, and had visited, several schools, had taken overnight visits and official visits to some different campuses. And it was kind of late in the process. Ohio State, showed some interest, and I had liked going up to Penn State football games with my family and to see my brother. And I said, maybe I'll take a look at this place. And the first time I went out there, it's a funny story. I ended up getting snowed in for 6 days on my official visit with another one of my classmates at Calvert Hall. And when I got home, I was like, there is no way in God's name I'm going to this place. But I had fallen in love with the facilities. I'd fallen in love with the people that I met. And the story goes like this. I was excited to kind of go to Towson or Hofstra. I had looked at Notre Dame and a couple other schools. And I had to show my father like the football facilities at Ohio State. And so I called the coach at the time. It was a guy by the name of Paul Caldwell. And I just said, listen, is there any way we can come out and visit? They were playing Air Force that week, and they were playing them in the shoe. And I wanted to show my dad like the Woody Hayes athletic facilities and show him, the Heisman trophies and just all these different things. And so we got out there, and my mom came with us, and she basically said right before we were going to meet with the coach, I didn't drive 6.5 hours here to see a bunch of football facilities, so make up your mind. And I had no interest at that point whatsoever to go to Ohio State. I was, all in on either Towson or Hofstra. I love the staffs there. It was, John Danowski at Hofstra at the time with Chris Colbeck on staff, just two guys that I absolutely fell in love with. And Towson was Carl Runk at the time, and, had just, really enjoyed meeting with him and having an opportunity to be around those guys. And I felt the pressure from my mom, so I just said, all right, I guess I'll come to Ohio State. And that's the way it went down. So my dad bought a hat out of the back of the coach's car. He put it on his head, and I was a Buckeye from that point forward. And it was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever, well, I should say it was one of the best decisions my mom's ever made.
You guys in the day used to play at Jesse Owens. How often did you guys play in the shoe as compared? Was playing in the shoe a special kind of deal?
Well, we were one of the only classes that never played in the shoe because the shoe was going through some construction issues when I was out there. One was, I think they were just making some changes to the stadium. Then they lowered the stadium. They took the track out, and then they added some of the press box or some of the I guess sky boxes or brought up the sides of the stadium. So I never got a chance to play in the shoe. So we played in Jesse Owens. We played on North Field, and both incredibly intimate stadiums. I enjoyed every second of playing out there, honestly.
You played in the Great Western. The Big Ten is a little bit different than the Great Western, but the Great Western Championships actually used to be played right here in Birmingham.
Yeah.
In Detroit. So we used to get a chance to watch you guys a lot, especially in those days. It was always fun to watch Ohio State. You go from great high school coaches to, arguably one of the better college coaches that ever strapped it up. He very fortunate to play for Coach Bresci.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Bresci is just an incredible person, first and foremost. Just an awesome, awesome guy. And he's an incredible X's and O's guy. I mean, he's one of those people that just is always thinking outside the box. I always enjoyed my conversations with him when I was at Ohio State. I love the standard that he held the guys in the team to. I love the fact that he was approachable. He always brought in great staff. And, since then, just having an opportunity to know him, more on the level of, coach and mentor and, a person that was a pretty big part of me coming down to this area of the country. He's everything as Bill. I mean, he's just a phenomenal person, and, couldn't ask for a better mentor than him, honestly.
Little inside baseball. How much time as an undergraduate did you spend on High Street?
Yeah, I mean, we got around.
No.
I think it was fun, but here's the problem. I never had any money, so most of the time I just hang out at guys' houses. Yeah.
I had a chance. I'm a Spartan, and we came to Ohio State to play, and later to come when with both Nick and Joe were there for camps and things of that nature. And as it was an older guy, we had a chance to visit some of the wonderful places along High Street. So I think Ohio State, without exception, has the best athletic facilities in the country. I don't know of anybody that does a better job athletically than Ohio State.
No,
Well,
it's off the charts.
It's just, you walk on that campus and you think we walk to the weight room and you go, and they just put $1 million weight room into some other university, and you walk in and Ohio State had done it 2 years previous.
I always said, like, whatever anybody else has, Ohio State has like 2 of them. Yeah.
Well, just the facilities that they have, and they're really proactive, from the process. And I think going there was certainly a great opportunity. Now, you studied education, am I correct?
Yes.
So you pretty much knew you wanted to be a teacher the whole time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, like I said, my junior year in high school, I decided I want to be a college lacrosse coach. And I was fortunate enough that they had a concentration at Ohio State with all the majors they have in coaching. So I did education with like a concentration in coaching, and was doing things, really starting my sophomore and junior year at Ohio State, where it was like incredibly progressive. I was taking classes where you were mic'd up and you were coaching, your sport to the other students in the class. And then they would play it back to you and break down, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, as much as I was learning from guys like Paul Caldwell and Joe Bresci and Jay Stolfert and Mark Goers and Greg Cahoon, some of the guys we had on staff that were just terrific, I was also getting it on the flip side in the classroom with some just phenomenal professors, and, was doing it with other student athletes who were interested in doing the same thing, whether it was being a teacher or whether it was being a coach, or even if they were, pursuing something where they could, teach in high school and coach in high school. But it was just a crash course in just, learning. And then, like you said, being named the captain as a sophomore, it was another area that I was just thrust into a leadership role where I had to kind of learn things on the fly.
You were, I want to talk a little bit about getting into your college career, but you had a pro career both in the NLL and the MLL. Who was the first guy you called to when you decided to play indoor with the long pole? Did you give Brody Merrill a call to figure out how that works, or did you just pick up a short stick and go?
It's a good question. That was a funny story because we've had guys here that have been drafted, and I didn't even know that was a possibility, but I was very fortunate. You talk about lucking into it. The Columbus Land Sharks, their first year was the year I graduated from Ohio State. And so the now defunct Columbus Land Sharks were looking for players. And so I think for a second that I would get drafted to play in a pro league nonetheless too. And I was sitting at my buddy Kevin Steffen's house, and he goes, "You're not going to believe this, man, but they're doing the draft and they're talking about you." And so I ended up getting picked by the Columbus Land Sharks. Had no idea what I was doing, but I was fortunate enough to have some good players on that team that were some veterans that had played, obviously, their whole life growing up in box. And it was cool because they actually moved kind of half the team to Columbus, and half the team was still living really up in Ontario. That's where the majority of our guys were. Yeah. And so I was, hanging out with Tracy Kaluski and Todd Bender, and they brought in a couple guys, a couple of native guys down, and they were all living in the area of Columbus where I lived. So I'd go over their house. I'd ask them for advice. We'd talk about the game. We'd do like X's and O's on a coffee table. We'd, watch VHS film. I'd study those guys in practice. And there was a point in time where I just absolutely fell in love with box lacrosse, everything and anything about it, and could not get enough of it. And I remember at the time I just said, man, I would leave, coaching to pursue this and go play in the summer and really get good at this and see how far it could take me. Fortunately, I didn't do that. But it was just, you talk about a love affair. I just loved everything about that sport, and, parlayed it for another 7 years in terms of, playing on different teams. And I always say I was the worst guy to ever play in the NLL, but man, I loved every second of it.
You won a world championship with the Mammoth in 6. I think you won a world championship with Philadelphia in 4. Fair? Am I right?
Yeah, Philadelphia was the barrage. I had a short stint with those guys. But yeah, the Mammoth in 06 was a pretty special year because it was the year after Gary Gate retired. I think, everybody was looking at our team like, are these guys going to be anything? And we were fortunate enough to have Gary become our coach. And I think the thing when Gary was playing, you just had a natural tendency to just watch Gary. And I think there were guys on the floor that would watch Gary. I'd watch Gary, from the seats. I'd watch him from the bench. I'd watch him from wherever he was. And I just you're in awe because he's, arguably the greatest guy that ever picked up a stick. And I always said, like, because of that, our offense was probably a little bit more stagnant than it probably should have been. And when Gary left, I think he recognized that, and we kind of put all of our eggs, not so much in one person's basket, but we spread them out amongst the entire offense. And the ball was moving a little better. You still had guys leading, like Gavin Prout down there. You had some really special guys like Jay Jalbert, who's one of the probably best athletes that's ever played this game. But the ball was zipping from side to side, and the defense kind of came together. We had some great leaders on the defensive end of the field and some awesome goaltending. And it just all kind of aligned that year, which is pretty neat.
I've mentioned this story a couple of times, and I don't want to belabor the story, but we had a chance to watch the 2006 championships from the scoring tent in London. And on Sunday, the previous Sunday before the exhibition, the United States beat the Canadians by a goal. At the end of the game, my then 15-year-old son was walking by, and Gary was sitting in a big tub of ice and kind of made mention that, boy, you looked old today. And it's hot. That championship, the temperature was at like near 100 for the entire week. And, he just 15-year-old kid making a comment to a legend. He kind of shrugged it off and says, well, wait till Sunday. Well, the following Sunday they played, and I watched probably 45 minutes watching Jeff Snyder take faceoffs and beating the snot out of the Americans. And then watch this 40-year-old, 42-year-old Gary Gate score 5, 6, 4, whatever the number of goals were in the second half. And he and Marichek had just went to town, and they won the championship. And I think they won by 2. And as he's walking off, my son was standing there, and he kind of made the comment. He says, he says, I thought you thought I was too old, but he said, how did that work for you? He just was a player. But conversely, I had a chance to see him play, and it's hard to explain how popular the Mammoth was in Colorado and Denver. I mean, 10, 12, 15, 17,000 fans, when that was not typical in those days in every city. I mean, he was a draw.
Yeah, Gary was special. I mean, I was always blown away competing against him and competing with him. Like, he didn't say anything. I mean, and he was a marked man every single time he stepped on the field. And, man, he let his play do the talking. And you talk about a guy who gave so much to the sport and continues to give so much to the sport. And, he would do anything. I mean, would do anything to help the game grow. He's pretty special.
Was making a decision as a professional athlete to go back to teaching, knowing you could never really make enough money in those days as a pro athlete, was that an easy choice? You think about guys now that play almost every sport that's professional, and you can make a living at it. In those days in lacrosse, you really couldn't make enough money to make it full time.
Yeah, I wasn't very good, so I didn't have anything to worry about with all that stuff. But some of the guys that were better, I think they definitely maybe hung on a little bit too long, and it probably affected their coaching career. But I always joke, I got a check one time when I was playing with the Mammoth, and I remember like emailing the GM at the time. I think it was Steve Govett, and our coach, and I said, "Was this like turn back the clock night for pay? Because my check is only for $7.50." So I didn't have a. If I wanted to live and not, eat ramen noodles the rest of my life, I knew I had to do something else.
Name out of the past. We're actually going to talk to Steve this afternoon at 4. We're going to talk about how many new NLL cities are adding. I think
that's awesome.
They're going to add a couple new programs here in the next part. Professional experience gives you this great opportunity, but you kind of know you want to be a teacher. Now, your first stop, I think, let me say this right, Goucher College?
My first stop was actually Denison.
Denison?
Yeah, Denison up in Granville, Ohio with Mike Caravana. And
another legend.
Yeah, man, talk about like the greatest year ever. Playing with the Land Sharks. I'm making pizzas. Believe it or not, was making ice cream for Grader's Ice Cream in Columbus. I worked at Ruby Tuesdays for about 2 weeks until they fired me because I wasn't selling enough appetizers. And, I would drive to Granville, Ohio, which is about 45 minutes away. I'm probably the worst driver of all time. I think I got like 15, 20 speeding tickets that year. Knew like every state trooper along that road. And we'd practice. At times we'd practice from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. I mean, it was insane. And we'd practice in the indoor facility. And I loved, you talk about like just what an awesome year. No responsibility outside of that stuff and just playing and coaching. And the team we had there was exceptional. I think we had like 10 or 12 All-Americans. We ended up making the Final Four, losing to Gettysburg at their place. And at that point, again, any doubt that I might have had about coaching was killed, because I was like, I got to do this. And it was basically for nothing. Mike Caravan every once in a while would give me a couple bucks, and, he'd give me chores. I painted the fence around his house, which I think every one of his assistants ever did. And he gave me a couple bucks for that. But it was awesome, and I think I learned a lot in those early years, whether I was at Denison or Goucher, and even at the University of Denver when I first got there, that I wanted opportunity over security, and I wanted to be at places where I could learn from great people, and I wanted to be at places where I felt like I was developing and growing, and every one of those stops gave it to me.
You single at the time?
I was, yeah.
That makes it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah.
The choices.
For sure.
There's a Coach Caravan has got, it's like a railroad stop going through there. You can name the amount of assistants. The kid who played for me in high school, who's now in the Colgate staff, went from Michigan State to there for a year, and he'd come back and say, I learned enough in the last year that what I'd learned the previous, 10 years coaching with very good coaches. He's a Division III legend, and he stays there, but he should be a Division I coach. He really should.
Yeah, Mike's special. Everything about him is just completely authentic and real. And, I really enjoy the times that we get a chance to chat, whether it's at coaches conventions, and he's, just great about like sending a book, every Christmas that he's read that he wants us to check out. And he sends it to all the guys that have been on his staff. And he's, like you said, he's got a good group of guys that he's had a lot of influence on their lives. If you look at his coaching tree, it's pretty special.
I have on a couple of occasions mentioned to his college roommate, who happens to be Kevin Corrigan, would have liked to have been in the dorm room with those guys as freshmen, knowing the two of those guys. I thought that would have been a lot of fun. So you get the grounding from the smaller schools, and then talk a little bit about getting to Denver, and a defensive guy going into coaching with Matt Brown and Jamie Monroe. That's got to be an experience that parallels nothing.
Yeah, it was awesome. You talk about two guys that just absolutely love the sport and talk about the sport 24/7 and eat it, sleep it, breathe it. Every second of every day was just, throwing out ideas, changing a lot of the stuff that we did, but kind of staying true to the core of kind of who we wanted to be and what our brand was going to be. And, I laugh. There were times where we would do something in practice, and then we would go home and we'd watch it, and we'd be on the phone from like 11 o'clock at night until 1 o'clock in the morning, like dissecting things and figuring things out. And again, I think about, sometimes I like flash back to some of the mentors and some of the people that I've been fortunate enough to be around. And it's just, it's incredible. It's like a who's who list of coaches.
Being a defensive guy, just hanging around Jamie for 5 or 6 years, does that help the process of understanding what maybe you talked to your offensive coordinator there at High Point?
Yeah, 100%. The one thing that I really, really took from Jamie from a coaching perspective was his ability to kind of understand and know everything that was going on within the program. If you want to be the best offensive coordinator, you got to be the best defensive coordinator, and vice versa. You got to know, all the stuff that's happening in the middle third of the field, from the face-off to the ride to the clear, to transition to, substitution pattern, substitution game. And it's something that, I've instilled in our staff. We'll sit down every day for about an hour and a half and just talk about every facet of the game, because I want those guys to be as well versed as I was leaving Jamie, after those 5 years. And I can tell you, before I got to Jamie, I was like solely focused on the defense. It was all about the defense. And after being with him, it was learning some different footwork technique offensively. It was learning the ins and outs of, some of the simplistic motion offenses that we would run out there that look so complex, but they really, when you broke them down, it was individuals playing off of other individuals. And just, it was being in the presence of greatness when you've got guys like Jamie, who's as good of an individual skill developer as there is out there, and a guy like Matt Brown, who's just incredible at connecting the dots. It was an immense amount of fun.
The early 2000s, Denver area took over and just exploded with lacrosse. Does Jamie or the university get some credit for that?
Yeah, I think Jamie should get a big piece of credit for that. And there were a lot of really good high school coaches at the time, and everybody was kind of working together. I remember being out there with, Jamie and Tom Gracer and Brian Perry and Mitch Bryn. I mean, Jim Soren. There were so many guys out there that just like love the sport and were, looking at this new program at Denver that was, transitioning into Division I, then became Division I, then started having success in Division I. Laura Barton, who the stadium is named after her husband, Peter, who has a book written about him called Not Fade Away. I mean, if anybody gets a chance to read that, it is the easiest one-day read. Was just this remarkable person. And Laura, decided that she wanted lacrosse, the lacrosse centerpiece of the Rocky Mountains to be at the University of Denver, and donated a large amount of money and created this stadium. And now all of a sudden there was a place where these kids could go play, and people could come watch games. And it was just like, it was really cool to be there during that boom. There was a lot of progressive thinkers that were like, we could be a hotbed out here. We could be a hotbed out here. And, to see it become what it's become with, Brownie staying on board and Bill Tierney, going out there and doing a tremendous job of continuing to grow the great game with Trevor, and then with Steve Govett and the Mammoth, and, the Mac Freeman and those guys with the Outlaws. I mean, it's become like, one of the places now that you can consider a hotbed and that you kind of have to go to every year now to recruit, where, when I was there, it was kind of getting started. And it's really neat to see where that's gone.
One of my current assistants, who's now back being an assistant, had gone and went out for 3 years to follow his wife out. And he was the coach at Denver South and had that experience. And he's come back to our staff, and he's now an associate head coach. He runs my defense for our high school program. And he would talk just in glowing terms of the last, he was there, I think, 15, 16, and 17. Yeah. And just how good. I was in San Diego in the early days, late 90s. Well, actually early 80s, middle 80s to late 80s. When Torrey Pines and Rancho Bernardo and some of those programs took off the ground, there was a lot of comparisons,
no doubt,
in that growth. And you couldn't look up and down the roster. You mentioned Tom Greaser. Tom's a Detroit guy, and one of the cool parts is you can't look down the roster and see a whole lot of guys from Denver. They're from, Islip, and they're from Baltimore, and they're from a lot of other places, and they brought the game, with them. And I think that's kind of cool. So Denver to Dartmouth. You were at Dartmouth what, for a year? Just a year?
I was at Dartmouth for 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. And,
different environment there.
Yeah, it was the first time I'd ever lived in a house that wasn't connected to another house. I grew up in apartments and townhouses, so that was a different environment for me. I'm not a big fan of the country. I'm more of as Andy Towers would say, an indoorsman than an outdoorsman. And so being up in Hanover, New Hampshire was definitely different. But I mean, just like every stop, loved every minute. And I think a big part of that was just the kids were so bought in, and the staff we had with Ryan Dennehy and Andy Towers was just incredible. I mean, and Andy was a guy who kind of gave you freedom and leeway to do a lot of different things, had kind of a more regimented system in place, knew kind of what he wanted, but said, like, we brought you here to bring some of the ideas and some of the things that you did at Denver here. And, it was really neat. It was the first time I'd really ever interacted or worked with Ivy League students, and their ability to retain knowledge it blew me away. I mean, honestly, the first day I went in there with a 50, 60 page PowerPoint on our defense and how we were going to do things. And, the next day I misspoke on one thing, and one of the kids was able to, go back and reference the thing I missed. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, I can't have a slip up with these guys. But it was a blast. I mean, we had a ton of fun up there. And if this opportunity didn't come along, I would have been happy staying up there with Andy and Ryan and those guys for a while.
Ended the Denver stint or the Dartmouth stint? When did you start thinking about, your own program? When did that start to seep in, or maybe earlier? Yeah.
I mean, I went on my first real Division I job interview, I think, when I was for a head coaching position when I was, I think, 26 years old. It was the University of Vermont, and was offered the opportunity to go there as a head coach, and found out, about that opportunity the day I got back from my honeymoon with my wife. And she had already packed her stuff. She was moving out from DC to Denver, and just said, this isn't the right time for us to make a move like this. And then had interviewed at a couple other places, got offered some jobs, didn't get offered other jobs, and felt like that was the next, natural step. While I was at Dartmouth, I was offered an opportunity to be the associate head coach at Harvard, and just didn't seem like, the right time to leave. And it was really enjoying being around Andy and Ryan and coaching there. So it was really my second year at Dartmouth. A good friend of mine, Bobby Muse, who's the head coach now at Wake Forest for men's soccer, was coaching out at the University of Denver at the time. He said, you should check out this High Point place. It's a school that's kind of, where Denver was a couple of years ago. They're investing a lot of money in the academics and the athletic side of things. And the athletic director is a fantastic person. I'm friends with him. The university president seems, very, very aggressive in terms of wanting to be great in everything they do. And, I said, all right, I'll take a look, call the athletic director, and, got a chance to come down here and interview. And it's honestly been just an incredible 10 years.
Talk a little bit about, you were very successful pretty quick. And how do you get there?
Yeah, it does. It boils down to just like bringing in the right people. We were never going to compromise our morals to bring in someone here that was a great lacrosse player, but not a great person, and someone that wouldn't help us get to where we wanted to be. And like I said before, I think a lot of that just revolved around the parents, and I take a lot of time, when people come to visit, to sit down with the parents for an hour, hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours, just talk and, figure out, what that relationship's going to be like with them. And it's very simple. I mean, it comes down to, I want people that have similar values as myself. I want people that, instill those values in their kids. And, I want a parent that if something was going wrong or their kid wasn't, living up to the standard that we think he should be living up to, that I could call the parents and they would be down here in the snap of a finger, and we could all sit down and resolve the issue. And, I think one of the most remarkable things outside of some of our on-field or off-field accomplishments over the last 10 years is we have never once had an issue with a parent. And we very rarely have an issue with our guys, getting into any sort of issues off the field. Most of the time when they do, it's things that we can resolve pretty quickly. So it's been a premium on good people, hardworking people. There's been some kids we've had to say no to that I think would try to pull the cart the other way. But, when you have the right people on board and you spend as much time with them as we do, it becomes a pretty special relationship.
A school like High Point is not, in a Power 5 conference kind of school. They're not in that. The league you're in is a great league, but it's, it isn't Hopkins and it isn't some of those kinds of schools. My question is, you've had the success of a top 10 program, and you've been a top 10 program, but you're at a mid-major, and maybe that's probably not the right word to say, but is parity enough to be able to stay there and be happy? Or are you looking over the fence for what might be a bigger job? Or is it just one of those things that the High Point's in a very unique situation where you are beating Duke and Virginia, but at the same time, you're not, I don't think, considered, at least in the outside world, in that same vein when we talk about the top programs. Is that a fair estimation?
Yeah, I think, anybody that says they're going to stay where they are forever is probably not telling you the truth. So you're always like listening when somebody has something they want to tell you. And there's been some opportunities over the last couple of years, but the support we have here, the people we have here, the time it's taken to kind of build this thing to where it is, there's a lot invested in it. And so leaving or, exploring other opportunities would be, it would be hard. It'd be really hard, not to say it can't happen, but I just love everything we have about this place, from our staff to the guys to, the way the parents allow us to run our culture, to the administrators, to, the people at the school that have, grown with us and seen what we've done. It's been a lot of fun. And it's got to the point where we say, like, we want to be a player-driven culture every year. And I'll just tell you like a story from this past weekend. So Iowa State win this past weekend in football over Texas. And one of our players sends a note to our guys in the WhatsApp that says, this was an incredible message that is completely in line with our team. And he said, we are a 5-star culture that doesn't get 5-star recruits, but we beat schools with 5-star recruits. And, I remember, seeing that a couple of years ago, they're saying like culture beats scheme. And it's something that we've talked a lot about. The development of our players is something we've talked a lot about. And there's some, real history right there now in our program of us being able to point to, the the 2016 Virginia win. We roll out there and their three midfielders are all the number one ranked midi in the country by their respective class. And we go out there with, Joe Tallane and Richard Bird and Nick Bittner, who nobody had ever heard of before. And we develop a system that allows those guys to play at full speed and, maximize their strengths and, kind of eliminate their deficiencies in terms of their ability to cover the ball and off the ball. And, you go into an environment like that and you beat somebody, and all of a sudden people are like, whoa, what's going on down there? And I think naturally people will first start off and say, like, something's happening. What's the deal? How are these guys getting so good so quick? But it really, it's been a lot lengthier of a process. But some of the guys we've had here early on really set the course, both culture-wise off the field and just work ethic and just buy-in on the field. And, I could sit here and talk about those guys all day, but it was a really, really, special group of guys that took a chance without anything. I mean, it was just a vision at that point.
I think parity is, using the NFL model, like there's a certain amount of parity that's happening. And while lacrosse is not growing in numbers like it did the previous 15 years, the number of better players because of travel and because of all the things that are happening, I think there's a larger pool. At least there seems to be a larger pool. Because I think kids are spending more time becoming, hopefully, more than a one-sport athlete, but at least I think that pool builds. I know more and more recruits out of Michigan every year are starting to find their place into really good programs. And
no doubt.
I think that's part of it. Now, the Southern Conference is by no means any slump. They're a really good lacrosse conference. And weather has probably something to do with that. You recruit a kid up here, he's happy heck to go to a place where it's 60 degrees in February.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. But most of it is just because it's a good conference and you guys play really good lacrosse.
Yeah.
So
I think the Southern Conference, it's been neat to see it grow, over the last really 8 years. And, you look at the Southern Conference's record against like some of the top conferences, the ACC, the Big Ten, and there's a lot of signature wins there, amongst the group. So it's getting better and better. And I think, the coaching in the league is fantastic. Each school seems to support the sport very well. And like you said, geographically, all desirable places where you'd want to go to school, and the academics at these schools are fairly strong. So it's a good recipe.
I asked a question about, looking over the horizon. I asked Lars Tiffany, if Brown doesn't make it to the finals his last year, does he get the opportunity to replace Tom Stars at Virginia? And he'd made comments throughout his last couple of years at Brown that he was happy to be home because it was his alma mater. Well, then Virginia comes along. And the old joke is you'd never say never. And obviously the rest is history. He moves and he's happy and things kind of move across. But we're starting to see guys your age spending more and more time at the universities where they've been hired. And we're starting to develop the Dom Stars of the next generation. And I think that's kind of cool because, continuity is important too, to make sure a program succeeds.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'd say this, like I said before, I think it takes a little bit longer than most people think to build not just a team that's going to be competitive on the field, but a culture that, allows you to hand the keys off to someone else. To the point where, this fall, we with everything that's going on, we asked a lot out of our guys to be player driven, off the field and on the field. We asked them to make a lot of sacrifices that, came down from us through the state of North Carolina or the school. Adaptability was a huge, huge piece of our, just opportunity to even get on the field when it gets to the spring, and doing with a positive mindset. And so there were times this fall where I just said to my staff, like, let's just let the guys have a captain's practice. And we always share with the guys this story of, a guy my father grew up with and went to St. Peter's Prep with, Bob Hurley, Sr., who's, one of the all-time greatest, basketball coaches, high school pro, whatever.
Yes.
The guy's in the Naismith Hall of Fame because of, his ability to lead and win championships and develop kids. And we share with them a story about Bob Hurley, having this AAU team made up of just St. Anthony's guys in Jersey City. And he would not go to the games because he had another job. But the guys would play harder than the teams that were coached by, these fantastic coaches from high school or, good assistant coaches from different programs. And we say to them, like, if we can have that kind of buy-in, we can have that kind of compete level when we're not around, like we're going to be in really good shape to the point where, I mean, I'm not trying to, say I would ever do this because I love being out there with the guys, but I'd feel comfortable giving the guys 3 days a week to go out and run stuff that they know we need to implement and have a conversation with our leaders and say, let's get this done, and know that there's not going to be guys out there fooling around and messing around. They're going to be dialed in. And, I don't know if you get that in 2 years or 3 years in a contract or 4 years in a contract. I think it takes some time. And I think the people that are patient enough to let their coaches put their systems in, if they prove to be like they're growing and working, like they reap the benefits down the line.
Coach Shirley also had a secret sauce, which was in those days. I know a number of people that know him, and fear was part of that process. You got out of line with that guy, and you got back to school, and he heard about it. You kept your nose straight. So yeah, there was something to that with him.
No doubt.
I promised I'd have you off this at 11 o'clock. So I just want a couple of last questions, and I've asked this kind of all the Division I coaches, and we all want bigger, faster, stronger players. You certainly want to recruit those kind of guys, but athleticism or IQ for you?
It has to be a little bit of both. I mean, honestly, we have our guys that are kind of the glue that holds everything together, guys, and they bring a certain sense of savvy in the deep, dark parts of the game where you need some IQ, and at times where you need to slow things down or speed things up, but you need athletes too. So for us, it's a great blend of both. I think for any successful program, it is.
The best answer we've had has actually come from Matt Brown, and he broke it down by position, which I thought was really interesting. And he said he could live with it.
If there was more than 3 minutes, I could probably do that. But.
Yeah, no, he broke down the positions as to why IQ made more sense than that athleticism position. And I started to think about what he said, and it was perfect. It was just perfect prose, because everything he talked about, you coach, so what he said was pretty accurate. Are you familiar with Billy Wolford at all from Columbus?
Oh yeah.
Billy, I talked to Billy a couple of days ago. Bill and I have been friends for a long time. His brother Teddy, who was at Arlington for years. Bill was always my roommate, whether we were at Ohio State or whether we were at Notre Dame or where we travel and stuff. And Billy was on the staff with Bear at the Ohio Machine for a while. And he told me about you about 15 years ago, that there's this guy coming. And it turns out that Billy couldn't have been more accurate. He was 100% right about your demeanor, and everybody I've talked to about you, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your skirt. I think you've gotten to where you've gotten to because you're a good coach, but you're a better man. And Billy had mentioned he just thought the world of you. And I thought that was kind of cool. It's the old guys like us always want to look down the hill to see but at the high school level, I just saw that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Coach Tignata took a high school job, the Hun.
Yeah. Yep.
So you go from college to the pros back to high school.
Yeah.
We have a different road in this sport than I think most have. So I just want to take the time to thank you for all that you've meant to lacrosse, and for spending, an hour with us kind of talking. And I will be repeating the story about your dad giving you your first stick to probably anybody that listened to me talk. So I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. No, this is great, man. You got a great demeanor, and you run in a good circle of people, man. If you're hanging out with Billy Wolford, it's a good crew.
Yeah. Thanks again.